Have you been wanting to try acrylic painting but you're on a budget? Stay tuned and I'll show you how I did this acrylic painting using $1 craft paints. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artists That Play, and today I am going to be painting an acrylic landscape using these craft paints by Apple Barrel. This is not a sponsored video, these just happen to be the paints that I had on hand. As you can see at Amazon, they are $17.82 for an 18-pack, so they're actually less than $1 a piece. I've seen them listed for about 98 cents on Walmart.com. But my sister, Sonia Blackstone from She's So Creative, she loves these paints as well. I will link one of her really awesome projects below so you can see what she did with them with some really cute canvas shoes. She was telling me that the other day she went and bought a bunch of them for 50 cents a piece at Walmart. So you can actually get them for much cheaper than $1. And you can get them pretty much anywhere that they sell craft paints or craft supplies. Michael's, Walmart, Joann Fabrics, AC Moore, they will all have them. And these are a very versatile craft paint. They're all-purpose. You can put them on pretty much any surface. So if you are somebody who is looking for a cheap alternative, these are a great paint. So I wanted to do this project for two different reasons. One, I've been wanting to do a cheap art supply challenge for a very long time. And two, I wanted to see if I could put out a video for you guys to give you a nice cheap alternative for those of you who are just now learning how to use acrylic paint and don't have a whole lot of money to do so. So right now I am testing out the blendability of these paints by doing a gradient in the sky. And these are a thinner acrylic paint, which I actually like. I am somebody who likes soft body acrylic paints. They just work better for my techniques. They don't dry out as fast, and you can blend with them more easily. And that's what I am doing here. I am blending them out. I'm going to be testing a bunch of different techniques in this video. I'm going to be testing the blendability. I'm going to be testing glazing, dry brushing, pretty much any type of acrylic technique that I normally do in my regular work. I want to test out the opacity of these paints, see how well they go over things, as well as the transparency, which obviously you'll see when I do glazing techniques. So a little bit about my history with these paints. These are actually the paints that I learned how to do acrylics with. I was maybe 13 when I started using acrylics. I think before then I used a lot of watercolors. Maybe I was 12. I may have been 12 when I started using these paints because they were so affordable and my mom would buy them for me. Back then they were 50 cents a piece, full price, I think. And I always wanted to learn how to paint. I had been painting for a while before then, but as I said, I used watercolors before I used acrylic paints, and I fell in love with the vibrancy of acrylic paint. And so these are the paints that I started with. I wanted to do this video because I've been using professional acrylics for years now, probably since I was 17, 18 is maybe when I started to upgrade my acrylic paints. And even the paints that I use now, I guess they're probably lower end artist grade and a bit higher end student grade. They're the System 3 acrylics is what I use the most. They're akin to Liquitex Basics. So they're kind of in between because they're soft body. And that's what I prefer to work with. Probably because I learned with these paints and these paints are so thin. So I still don't spend a whole ton of money on my acrylic paints because I want to be able to do a bunch of different techniques, and I find my soft body acrylics to be within the range of the amount of techniques that I like to do. So I'm not one who spends a ton of money to begin with, but they are definitely more expensive than $1 a piece. So this is definitely a cheaper alternative. And I actually prefer these paints to some of the student grade paints that are out there marketed towards beginner artists, such as the Reeves paints and the De La Rowney Simply Acrylics. I would choose these over those paints any day, because these are craft paints, so they're made to go on multiple surfaces, which means they're not going to lift as easily. Some of the cheaper acrylic paints out there that are marketed towards beginner artists, such as the brands that I just listed, they lift when you try to put a new layer on top of them, and that's just not okay. These paints don't do that because they're made to adhere to different surfaces. So I would recommend these over some of the cheaper student grade acrylic paints out there any day. Now, that's not to say that all of Daler Rowney, for instance, is bad. My System 3 acrylic paints are Daler Rowney paints. I love Daler Rowney as a company for their artist quality stuff, but they have different grades of acrylic paint. I've talked about that in previous videos. They're not all built the same. I'm not a huge fan of their sets for beginners. I would recommend these over that. And again, System 3 aren't that expensive either, but they're definitely higher quality than some of the paints that they put out there. But Apple Barrel paints, they're great. Like I said, I used them for years. I still use them for crafting techniques. I ran into a few things with the paints being a little bit chunky and not mixed well, even though I shook them. But part of that could be the fact that the paints that I have are actually really, really old. These are probably over a decade old, some of them, some of the colors that I'm using, because I have had them for so long. And they're still working, though. Like, that's what's so awesome about them. I shook them up. They're still working for what I wanted them for. As far as light fast results, I don't have any light fast ratings for these. I looked on their website, didn't see any listed. There's none listed on the bottles. But I can tell you, because I painted with them so many years ago, I do have some paintings still kicking around that I use these paints for, and I haven't noticed any fading. I don't really have them hanging up on my walls necessarily, but I've never noticed any fading from my really old paintings from when I was 13. So if that tells you anything. However, I wouldn't necessarily do, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily do a fine art painting with these and sell the fine art painting. I think you could sell prints from them. I wouldn't dare to sell the fine art painting just because there really isn't a whole lot of information out there about light fast testing, and you wouldn't want to sell it to somebody and have it fade out. However, I have seen some artists do some realistic work with these online, so you can definitely get some great results with them, and I think that they're really great for practice until you have built your skills enough to the point where you're comfortable spending money on artist quality paints. So right now, I'm just going through and putting some of the details in the leaves. I am laying in the shadows first, and then I am going in with my midtones and my highlights later on. And you can see, like, I can get some pretty good fine detail with these. You can see that in the branches and in some of the grass. And I go in and I end up changing that grass so much. Part of the problem was I didn't have the colors that I necessarily needed to get the depth in the grass that I wanted. And I didn't really want to use a whole lot of black because this black will muddy things up quicker. It's not a very rich black. It's kind of a matte black, and it makes it so that things dull out really easily. So you really have to mix a lot of color with this black in order to get a rich black. I usually mix like a darker blue and a brown with it, just to get my rich blacks in there. But I'm somebody who is not against using black in a painting as long as you have enough color mixed with it so that it doesn't muddy it up. Using it for shadows is really hard because, again, you don't want to dull things out, but like I said, you just have to mix colors with it. But I'm really happy, for instance, with the way the sky came out and the gradient I was able to achieve. When I did the sky, I had a harder time getting it as light as I wanted. You really have to use a lot of white when you're mixing it with another color in order to get it to be bright, bright, bright like that. So I ended up using a lot more white than I would have liked to because it is such a thin paint. However, in acrylic painting, I find I go through white more than anything anyway, so it's really not much different in that aspect. Again, I'm just going through and doing the details. Like I said, I've been wanting to do a cheap art supply challenge for a really long time, and this is kind of my version of that, but I do have plans for a really fun dollar store art challenge where I will be collaborating with my sister. Again, I will link one of her projects below. She's very creative. She does a lot of crafting. She also does a lot of crocheting. So it's going to be a fun collaboration. Not sure when we'll get the chance to do it, but I have some really fun ideas for the video. So as you can see, I'm going through now and glazing some yellow over that grass. I really like to have my landscapes and my grass to be very warm. I'm doing it in the tree as well. And I really did not have to mix a whole lot of water with that. I didn't use any glazing medium. I just used water and it worked for what I needed it for. So as far as glazing goes, you can definitely do a lot of glazing techniques with this acrylic paint. Again, I'm just going through in the trees and brightening things up. I had a blast with this because, like I said, I used to use these paints all the time when I was younger, but it had been years since I had used them. So there were some things that I did struggle with because, you know, they're not necessarily as highly pigmented as some of the paints that I work with now. So I had to do a lot more layering. But it was, all in all, it was really a fun project to work on. And I think I might do more like it. The paper that I'm using is, I believe it's the Canson acrylic paper, which isn't overly expensive. I will link that in the description below as well. But again, these are all-purpose paints. So if you don't have access to high-end paper or access to canvas, or you don't have the funds for it, you can probably just use wood. I would paint white over it first and then start doing it. You know, you'd want to layer there. If you don't have any gesso, you would want to layer probably a few layers of white first over it so that the wood doesn't just suck up the acrylic paint. But you can definitely do fine art applications on wood with these paints. That's one of the things that I did actually when I was a kid because I didn't have a whole lot of money growing up. So when I was painting, I would paint on blocks of wood. My dad actually still has a couple of my little paintings done on blocks of wood hanging out in his living room from back then, and they haven't faded out. So, like I said, if you don't have a whole lot of money, work with what you have. So right here, I'm signing the painting, and I'm going to test out the opacity of the paint because I didn't like the way I signed it, so I'm going to paint right over it. And as you can see, these paints went right over that black really well. So the opacity is really good. So you can glaze with them, you can dry brush with them, which I did some dry brushing in the flowers and in the grass, which I meant to mention before. You can paint right over things with them. They're really versatile. We are nearing the end of the painting now. I just want to say I would highly recommend these paints to anybody who is on a budget and is looking to learn how to paint in acrylics. And here's my finished piece. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to learn more about these paints, I listed their website below. And if you like what you see, please hit subscribe. If you would like to learn more about me and my art, my social media links are in the description below. Thank you. Bye.